All right, well, let's go ahead and I'll call the meeting to order and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready?
All right.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the
to the
republic
republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That gets clunkier every time we do it. All right. First order of business is our presentation from Lockton. So we're delighted to have you here. And Amy, do you need to tee this up in any way, or?
Nope, I will just share the screen. They have a PowerPoint, and I will let them introduce themselves and have at it.
Rebecca, ladies first.
Thanks, Tim. Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Plavkin. I'm an account executive with Lockton, and I work with the Simsbury team, the town and board side, for their strategic initiatives within their employee benefit package, wellness, my help on the union side with the negotiations, and I manage the rest of the team in terms of deliverables to the Simsbury team.
Thank you. My name is Tim Hosselman. I work with Rebecca on the Simsbury team. My main responsibility is on the financial side. I help from reviewing budget, reviewing projections. I pretty much answer to Rebecca and do what she asked me to do. So
you heard that, Amy, didn't you?
So we appreciate the opportunity to present tonight. What we'd like to do today is kind of walk through the process for stop loss purchasing, and then kind of kick off and talk about budget, how we look at your budget, timing of our budget, and our expectations for the coming year. So if you wouldn't mind, Amy, if you wouldn't mind jumping forward one more slide. So stop loss market is a difficult market for us. We at Lockton approach the stop loss market as a commodity market. This is a purchase that has no impact on employees, other than the financials that are added back into the overall expected cost of the plan. Other than that, purchasing of stop loss has no major impact. So Lockton as an organization, we market our stop loss out of one specific office. It's out of our Dallas office. They've got a stop loss team that is responsible for marketing all our self-funded stop loss business on an annual basis. So, we'll talk about it in a few more slides, but this does help us. It helps us from a negotiation standpoint. Plus, it helps us make sure that we have the most appropriate pricing terms for our clients. And we'll talk about that more in a minute as well. Just on this slide, I think the key takeaway here is that the stop loss market is a hardening market. It is becoming very price sensitive. It's becoming more difficult to obtain strong financial quotes every year. What we are seeing is that carriers are, for cases that are clean, and by clean I mean there's not a lot of ongoing large claim activity. For those cases, we're seeing aggressive quotes coming from the reinsurer markets. For cases that are, I would say, not so clean, that have high cost claimants that are expected to continue, we struggle. And that is something that, from a pricing standpoint, we're going to make sure you have the best stop loss contract available to you. However, there are going to be certain years where yes.
This first time through, just explain what stop loss is. I think I know, but I'm not sure. And is it only for medical and pharmaceutical? And when does it kick in? I'm sorry, but I need to go back to square one before you get all the way down the road.
No, appreciate that. I appreciate that interruption. So stop loss. The town and board of Simsbury is under a self-funded medical plan. You partner with Cigna. Cigna is the administrator of your medical as well as your pharmaceutical plan of benefits. But you are on the risk. You don't have insurance for covering your medical plans. You are paying claims as they are incurred by your membership. In order to protect your risk, you purchase stop loss insurance. And the stop loss coverage that Simsbury has is called individual stop loss. What we have in place in Simsbury is a stop loss policy that caps any one member, their claim in excess of $275,000. So the first $275,000 in the contract year, and the contract runs on your fiscal year, the first 275 is Simsbury's responsibility. Anything above that is picked up by the reinsurer. So there were two cases within your last fiscal year. So fiscal year 7/19 through June of 20, you had two large claims that exceeded that 275,000. So Simsbury paid the first 275, and then Sun Life, who was your reinsurer into the 2019-2020 fiscal year, picked up the remaining portion of those claims.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. So, stop loss, it's a purchase that is really based on risk, what the carriers are anticipating based on your demographics and also based on your claim activity. As I mentioned, the markets this past year kind of hardened. My expectation, unfortunately, due to the pandemic that we're currently in, my expectation is that it will be another hard market when we approach the 7/1 of 2021 renewal. So just put that out there that it will be marketed again. It will be reviewed. It will be debated not only at the carrier level, but also at the individual stop loss level. So as I mentioned, Simsbury currently has a $275,000 individual stop loss level. We will look at higher levels as well. So if you go up in price, it reduces the overall cost, but it puts more liability onto the plan. Okay. Any questions so far?
Yeah, when you do negotiate with various plans, do you get down to the granular level of looking at Simsbury's? I know you mentioned COVID as one of the driving factors, that Simsbury has a particularly low case rate, and most of our employees actually live in Simsbury or nearby. Do you look at that sort of thing? Because, actually COVID sort of depressed all sorts of claims last year, but obviously people who got COVID had high claims. But, I think you're going to see some pent-up demand from people who avoided going to the hospital last year, and that on top of COVID. But we have a very low COVID rate.
Yeah, no, that is all taken into consideration. I mentioned COVID as a more of a general reinsurance risk than specific to Simsbury. It will be considered for Simsbury. So whenever we price stop loss claims, we go to the stop loss market. The markets always ask for high cost claimants. And what are your current high cost claimants? And they look into the details of what they expect ongoing as well. So Lockton has a team of clinical folks that review it, but the reinsurer markets also look at that.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to make sure they don't look at Connecticut averages as opposed to Simsbury averages when they're looking to the future of COVID.
Yeah. No, they'll actually look at your specific large claim information.
Okay.
But
Kim,
a lot of the pricing is built on manuals. So manuals come into play, and when I say manual rates, what their expectations are overall for a book of business, that comes into play. So a general COVID assumption will be placed on that as well.
It looks like Lisa has a question, but I think she's having some sound issues. We can't hear you, Lisa.
Well, we can come back to Lisa. Oh.
Okay.
All right. So, Amy, if you don't mind jumping forward one more. So what we thought we'd do tonight was to show you how the markets responded to Simsbury when we put the stop loss out to bid for 7/1 of 2020. So, we knew going in what your stop loss level was, that 275,000 that I mentioned. We also looked at alternatives, 300,000 as well as a $325,000 risk level, stop loss level, if you will. Going into the renewal, we knew we had a 39% rate cap. We also knew we had no new lasers at renewal. So rate cap's pretty easy. Basically, we know that we were not going to get more than a 39% increase from Sun Life, who was your carrier last year. No lasers. What that means is the stop loss market, when you go through a marketing for stop loss coverage, looks at the underlying large claim activity. If they see a potential for significant claims, they will laser certain individuals. And what that means is they will price them at a different individual stop loss level. So if I have an ongoing expected claim for the coming year, and that claim is expected to be, call it 400,000. There's Lisa.
I think I'm here. Sorry.
Do you want to try to get your question in, Lisa?
No, I can't
We
hear
lost
you.
her again.
No.
Hello?
All right, well,
I can hear you.
so let's continue on, and if Lisa gets connection, we can go back to her questions. So
If she can put it in the chat too, and then I can monitor that.
okay.
I'll send it to her.
Okay. So a laser is a reinsurer's way to put a higher individual stop loss level on one or two members for the coming plan year. So locked in standard practice is that when we place a stop loss contract, that we require them, the reinsurer, to have a rate cap and also to have no new lasers at renewal. So Sun Life could not put a higher level on your claimants for 7/1 of 2020.
So a laser's an outlier? Is that what it is?
Yeah, pretty much so. And it's a way for an insurer to reduce their risk. If you talk to the reinsurance market, their comments will always be stop loss is about protection from unknown risk. If there's a known risk, we may laser that known risk at a higher level. Something I don't agree with, something our stop loss teams don't agree with, and that's why we require them to put no new lasers into their bids and into their contracts. Okay. So you can see the market.
Now this is Rob, just so I understand. If they identify one individual and they raise the stop loss from 275 to 750,000, let's say.
Yeah.
That delta would be then a direct expense of the insurance fund on the part of the town.
Exactly. It's an additional liability. If that member had no claims, then it's no impact.
Yeah.
But it typically is an additional liability that's factored into your budget projections.
And is the premium different for that individual?
Yeah, typically what happens, actually, let's jump forward to that middle chart here, the market response.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see that we went out to 14 different markets, 6 quoted, 8 declined. And you can see what the range is of those folks that quoted. There were 6 that quoted that ranged from 9% all the way up to 64%. However, you'll notice that 9 has an asterisk, which says there were lasers quoted within their bid. So we had 2 vendors that quoted aggressively. Sun Life came in at 27 with No lasers at renewal because that was part of the process. But Tokyo Marine came in with a 9% overall flat increase in fixed cost. However, they had 4 individuals who they lasered. So they put in a higher individual stop loss on those 4 particular members. This added additional liability to Simsbury of roughly $275,000. So when we're looking at the overall cost, we have to factor in that $275,000 as potential liability to Simsbury. We also received a quote from Anthem. Anthem was in at a fixed cost increase of just over 18%. Anthem had 2 lasers on the plan. One laser was at $400,000. The second laser was at $1 million. So this put an additional liability on Simsbury of roughly $850,000. So although their fixed cost was lower than the incumbent, the additional liability because of the lasering made them not a good financial offering. Questions on that?
So,
yes.
Are you at liberty to tell us what the diagnoses were that they chose for these lasers? Because some things are pretty predictable and some things are not.
So
I mean, I know you'd laser into someone with a chronic illness that's going to go on and on, but you just some are more predictable than others.
Yeah. So in our stop loss discussion with the town, we actually go through an evaluation. So our clinical team, Lockton has a clinical team that's part of our stop loss unit. We look at any claim that is in excess of 50% of the 275. So anything over the 137,500, our clinical team takes a look at the claim data that comes from Cigna, and we actually dig through it and we come up with an overall expected cost. And again, based on the diagnosis, based on the treatment protocols that are being done for that particular member, we come up with a range, if you will, a low cost and a high cost of those particular claimants. Now, that's not shared with the markets, but that is shared with Simsbury because, we're looking at these lasers. We're looking at, the potential additional liability that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
When we did our review for stop loss, there were 3 claimants that were expected to exceed the 275,000 on the high projection. Just shared with Simsbury because we're looking at these lasers. We're looking at.
Hi, are you still there?
I'm still here, but I don't know where everybody else went.
I'm here too.
It's all frozen. There comes Tim. Tim, you back?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, we lost you for a minute.
Oh,
So
I'm
I
sorry.
finally got on and lost you.
Yeah, it sounded somebody was asking a question and they got cut off. So I apologize. I didn't hear the full question. Okay. Well, these results are shared with the town, and we go through an evaluation of, we do a Monte Carlo simulation and looking at these results to determine, what is the appropriate buy for Simsbury. So if Amy, if you don't mind, if you could jump to the next slide. So this illustrates the performance of the plan, the stop loss performance of the plan for the last 2 fiscal years, and then it shows projections for 2020. So when we're doing the pricing for 2020, we're looking at not only the $275,000 individual stop loss level, we looked at $300,000 as well as $325,000. We then run a Monte Carlo simulation that runs through 10,000 iterations, and based on the number of members covered under the plan, which is roughly 1,400, we come up with an expectation of which price is the best financial price for Simsbury.
And what is a Monte Carlo simulation?
So Lockton as a company, with all our self-funded clients, we get specific claim data for all our self-funded clients. So for any client that is self-funded with Cigna, we're getting a quarterly claim feed. For any client that is self-funded with Aetna, we're getting a quarterly claim feed. We house that in our system, which is called InfoLock, and it gives us the ability to run simulations based on 1,400 covered members. So we're running 10,000 iterations of 14,000 members to determine what is the expectation for large claims. Claims in excess of the 275, claims in excess of the 300,000, and claims in excess of the 325. Those simulations then help us determine what is the appropriate pricing point for Simsbury for the coming year. Now, pricing is only one thing. You also have to consider risk. 2 years ago when we were having this discussion, the health fund wasn't as sound as it is today. So we wouldn't have expected the risk tolerance in Simsbury to be that high. So, like I said, pricing is one piece, risk is another, and that's discussed when we're discussing the stop loss renewal.
Tim,
All that makes sense, but what's Monte Carlo?
It's a simulation tool.
Okay.
it runs different scenarios. Tim, I had a question for you on that.
Yes.
One of the things that it's Lisa, and sorry about the earlier
No worries.
confusion. I have a few questions, but specifically on this, there is a relationship between how much reserves we have, because that goes to the risk tolerance.
Yes.
And the reason why that might be important to the Board of Finance is if you do have substantial reserves, the increases that the town and employees are charged are often less. The reserves are lower. The increases of town and employees tend to be more. Can you talk about the relationship between how high reserves are versus what is going to be charged to the town and the Board of Ed in the following year, and how that works?
Sure. Lisa, if you don't mind, if we could wait a few slides, because we actually get into the budgeting piece, and that will be talked about then.
Okay, yes, that's fine. Can I just do a quick follow-up on the stop
Yeah.
loss?
Please.
275 is when it kicks in. Is there a maximum, and do we tier the stop loss with another carrier for a higher amount, like over $1 million?
No, it is at 275, and it's only at 275. It's not, we don't have reinsurance on top of the reinsurance, and we also do not purchase aggregate stop loss. So what you're referring to is if you protect the plan in total, there is an aggregate stop loss protection. Now, your 670 employees covered under the benefit plan, the predictability of your plan is pretty credible. So we don't recommend, for groups of 670 lives, we typically do not recommend aggregate stop loss coverage. So let me describe what aggregate stop loss coverage is.
Yeah, we know.
Individual protects any one member. Aggregate protects all members under the plan. Excuse me. So as I mentioned, individuals set at 275. Anything less than 275 is Simsbury responsibility. Anything over is the reinsurer. With aggregate stop loss, the reinsurer comes up with what's considered an expected claim number. And then they develop a maximum claim number based on the expected. So let's use 25%, because most aggregate stop loss protection is written at 125% of expected. So a carrier will come up with an expected medical/RX claim per employee per month. They will add a 25% risk corridor on top of that. That is what is deemed your maximum liability on a per employee basis. So I don't have it in front of me, but so for the coming year, for the current year, we projected Simsbury's liability of roughly $14.6 million. So $14.6 million on 673,000. Okay, let me just do this real quick. That's roughly $1,700 on a per employee per month basis. So what the reinsurer will do, I don't know if I have that right. Bear with me. Yeah, it's rough. What the reinsurer will do is they will add 25% onto that 1733, the expected claims per employee per month. That will be the maximum that Simsbury would pay out in any given year for your Cigna insured medical plan. So what you're saying, or what aggregate stop loss protection does, is it protects Simsbury in total. Simsbury hasn't had that since we become involved as your consultant, and we have not considered that since we've been involved. Normally, they're going to probably charge you a couple bucks per head, maybe $5-6 per head for that protection on a monthly basis. Small premium, but the likelihood that your claims are going to fluctuate by more than 25% in any given year is very, very low. So that's why.
Yeah, just in comparison to CT Prime, I know that they had different levels. So can you talk about what they were doing? Was that an aggregate or was that individual stop loss? And it's at 275 so you hit 275 in costs, the stop loss pays for all that 275, but not $1 more. Is that how it works?
Nope. No. Stop loss pays
everything
for everything above.
Right.
And there's no cap.
And there's no cap.
And there's no cap.
Oh, okay. That's what I was looking for. Okay.
Yep. So any individual member, Simsbury pays first 275, reinsurer pays anything above, no cap.
So is the premium for aggregate generally more expensive than doing an individual stop loss like this? Is that why you recommend against it?
Yeah, the premium for aggregate coverage, I'll just give you a quick ballpark here. Figuring at $8 a head for 670 lives, aggregate coverage is going to cost you $64,000. And again, what that protects is pretty much not a lot. Now, if you were to so a lot of folks will say, well, why don't we remove individual stop loss? We pay a lot of money for individual stop loss. Why don't we remove that and just have aggregate? Well, the problem is if you remove individual stop loss, the aggregate price tag increases significantly. Because what happens is with individual stop loss, only 275,000 would go to the aggregate coverage level.
Okay, that was my question. One or the other, not one and the other. Okay, so if it were just aggregate versus just individual, aggregate would be more expensive.
Correct. Yeah, and I don't even know that the reinsurance market would provide aggregate without individual. I don't think I've ever seen that.
Okay,
thank
you.
Good questions. So just back to this exhibit real quick. Lisa, you mentioned CT Prime. We did go to CT Prime this year as an afterthought. You guys were with CT Prime up until June 30th of 2018. When that renewal was presented, we moved the business to Sun Life because Sun Life was more competitive. When we approached CT Prime, they gave us a rate, a base rate of $74.81, which was higher than Sun Life. But what the $74.81 did not take into consideration was the expense component added to that by CT Prime. So CT Prime never gave us a final rate, but they told us their rate would be over $80 when you factor in the expenses associated with the purchasing coalition.
It's for similar plans?
Yeah, with the exception, CT Prime, although they would offer no new lasers, they did not offer a rate cap for 7/1 of 2020. So we've got a rate cap on the table with Sun Life of 40% with no new lasers. CT Prime was a higher purchase price, and it also did not provide you with a rate cap protection. All right. Two more things on stop loss. Aim, if you want to jump to the next one. So this is our benchmark slide. There's only really two things I want to point out here. You can see at the top right-hand corner of this, it shows what the average specific level, stop loss level was in 2019. So for instance, you see a deductible level of 250,000. The average price in 2019 was $63.32. The average price for 300,000 was $50.90. The average price for 275 that wasn't listed was $57.11. What that tells us is that in 2019, your $60 rate was consistent with what we see on average. The other thing to note is the chart right below that. And again, we look at a 700 life group to determine what do we see on average the individual stop loss level to be. And you can see it's roughly 225 to 250,000. So again, Simsbury's right in line with our overall expectations. Questions on that? Okay, so I mentioned earlier that Lockton does national purchasing of stop loss. You can see that in 2019, we placed over $1 billion in stop loss premiums. We have clinical teams on staff that look at any large claims to determine if the care is appropriate, to determine if there are alternative treatments available that will help us mitigate cost and cost increases when it comes to stop loss coverage. Now, we don't have any specific things that we've found on Simsbury yet, but recently we've found a couple other things in reviewing cost. I'll mention one. We've got a claim that is currently being paid by United Healthcare. It was for varicose vein treatment. United Healthcare paid the claim. It claimed for two treatments of varicose vein treatment. It was over $186,000. We're in the process of having UHC investigate that claim to determine whether or not it was appropriate. We've already determined it's not appropriate, and determine why the claim was paid. So we are, and we continue to look at large claims in an attempt to control and mitigate large claim activity.
So to be clear, they paid the claim with our money. It wasn't their money.
Yeah,
right.
Assessed the claim, approved it, and the money went out of our
Well, no, wait a minute.
insurance fund.
That was an example. That was not Simsbury.
Oh, okay. All right.
You might have heard me
But-
say
but
United
if-
Healthcare. United Healthcare.
But that's an example of the thing that can happen. I got it.
Yes.
Exactly. So we're
And you're
close.
right that it would have been our money. If it had been our person, it would have been our money.
Right.
Exactly correct. So something we keep an eye on.
One more thing on that in terms of with 690 participants, do we do audits, either you or the town, as to people who are appropriately on the plan? Like there might have been a divorce or a child turns 27. How are we monitoring who is appropriately a member of the plan?
We have not done an audit. We haven't been involved with any audit with Simsbury. I know Simsbury does do a very good job at monitoring eligibility. I don't foresee this being an issue. I don't know if Amy or Maria, if you guys want to address that at all, but I don't anticipate this is an issue due to how Simsbury is monitoring eligibility.
I can speak to that a little bit. So as far as who's on the plan and what we're being charged for each participant, that is actually reconciled monthly.
But we look at who is eligible. So if someone turns 27, they come off the plan. A child turns 27, they're no longer on their parents' plan. How are we monitoring that? Or if there's a divorce?
I don't know about the children aspect. Maybe Maria can speak to that piece of it. But I do know that for our participants who is on the plan and who shouldn't be on the plan, as far as the employees go, that is reconciled monthly.
Amy, I can help on the age 26 dependents. So the age 26 dependents, they are monitored from Cigna's eligibility. So reports are provided to Terry on the board side and Eric on the town side with those dependents when they turn 27 to take them off of the plan.
And then change in marital status, is that also monitored by the different HR departments?
So from my understanding, that's disclosed by the member to the HR departments to make those changes.
So there has to be a disclosure if there's a change. If they don't tell them that there's a change in marital status, there's no adjustment?
Yeah, there's no central reporting for that. So it would be an employee reported activity.
Maria, can you speak to that? How do we monitor that?
In terms of whether or not somebody is being honest with us about their marital status, if they have a change in
No. If there's a change,
sorry.
I'm sure they were honest when they filed it, but people may forget in the course of their life that this is one of the things they need to do.
Sure. I mean, we do our best to, inform folks that when they have a change in status, to notify us. And changes typically take effect within 30 days. So, for example, if it's a birth of a child, notify us within 30 days. Otherwise, somebody has to wait until open enrollment occurs. And then similarly, sometimes too, you may get certain, divorce decrees or things of that nature where for a period of time, somebody may need to maintain a spouse on their health insurance. So sometimes we would carry a person for that reason. But you're right. I mean, if somebody were to legally get divorced, generally that would require the employee to inform us within, again, 30 days of that happening.
And we advise them of that is, I guess, my question. Do we have a process in place where employees know to do that? Because you might not know to do that.
Generally, Lisa, I would say most people that are getting divorced, because there is an additional premium they pay for the person they're divorcing, right? There's an additional, so they generally aren't all that nice about wanting to pay extra premiums for the person they're divorcing. So I'm going to guess most of the time they tell us.
Well, they have to enroll once a year anyway, right? Do they reeval on an annual basis who's qualified that they're qualified dependents, right? Do they have to sign up and re-enroll every year?
No, so open enrollment is what occurs on an annual basis, and that's for folks who have had a change in status, for example, during the year, but may not have reported that to us. So let's say maybe somebody gets married and maybe their spouse is covered by a different plan. Perhaps they got married 6 months prior, and during open enrollment, they've now decided that they want to add their spouse to the plan. That's what would typically happen on an annual basis. Again, during the open enrollment period, we might see, again, of adding dependents, removing dependents, or potentially switching from the high deductible health plan to the HMO or vice versa. That's typically what we would see happen, again, on an annual basis during open enrollment.
But generally, if they do nothing, they're just re-enrolled in what they were already in.
Okay.
They just continue as is. Yep.
I'm going to suggest we keep moving here. We're getting fairly far down in the weeds. So maybe Tim, you could.
Yep. So Aim, if you want to move to the next slide. So this is an illustration of overall health fund cost. So on an annual basis, Lockton develops an overall budget for Simsbury. We're looking at your entire self-funded plan. We're looking at, which includes not only the medical and RX with Cigna, but includes the Cigna dental for the town side and the MetLife dental for the board side. We go through an evaluation, and first off, we project claims. So the top portion of this illustrates the claim projections. And you can see on the far right-hand side, we take a look back at what we had projected in 2020, what we had projected for fiscal year 2020. And then we update where we're at as we're going through the year. So initially, when we provided the fiscal year 21 budget for Simsbury, we provided that in the middle of November. So in the middle of November, we would have had 4 months of known claims. and we would be looking at 8 months of projected. So what we do then do is we take that fiscal year 20, what we initially had projected, we project forward for the remaining 8 months of 2020 to come up with a updated projection for fiscal year 20. In addition to that, we look forward. We do a projection for fiscal year 21 as well. So these numbers are all based on sound actuarial and underwriting principles. We go through a formula and an evaluation, looking at claims, pulling out large claims, looking at expected costs from one time period to the next, so we can do our fiscal 21 projections. That's a variable. That's a variable expense that changes throughout the plan year. But again, based on 673 employees covered under the medical plan, it's pretty consistent from year to year. You can see if you look back to fiscal year 2017, the actual claim results that year were a little bit high. That year they were 12.3% higher than 2016. Fiscal year 18, we were 4% higher than 17. Fiscal year 19, we were 7.5% higher than 18, and so forth. So going back to that question regarding aggregate stop loss is protecting you for 25% change. That's typically not going to happen with a group of 700 people, and hence why it's not recommended.
Right.
In addition to projecting forward claims, we look at the expenses. Now you have expense components that are associated with the administration of your health plans. Cigna charges you an access fee. Cigna charges you an administration fee. You also have stop loss premiums that are paid out to protect you from that large claims. You've got ACA fees, and you also have consulting fees. So you can see when we do our projections for the coming year, we factor in overall expenses of roughly 1.1 million. Now, because the board, as well as the town, offers high deductible health plans, of which you do a seeding into employees' HSAs, we bring the HSA seed into the overall health cost. We also look at what you pay for life insurance, and we look at what the expectation is for pharmacy rebates. So again, as part of your self-funded plan with Cigna, we negotiate pharmacy rebates. So if your members are being prescribed brand name drugs, whether that be in a retail or a mail order setting, you do receive guaranteed rebates for every brand name drug. You can see in 2018, that was 350,000, 19, 436. Actual 2020 is 483,000, and then we had projected 484 for fiscal year 21. So this is how we budget and come up with budgetary rates for Simsbury. That being said, this is fluid. I mean, initially we had done this in mid-November. We looked at the budget again at the end of January. We looked at it again in March, but it didn't change, so we didn't even present an additional budget in March. The only thing that changed after we did this budget at the end of January was the stop loss. Stop loss is a purchase that does not get firmed up until the renewal approaches. I believe last year we did not firm up stop loss until May. So, we're doing pricing, we're doing the bid process, so we have an understanding and an expectation when we do the budget, but the finalization of it doesn't happen until the May timeframe. Any questions on the budgetary process and how we develop this?
I'll just go back to my original question, just
Sure.
the balance between the amount of reserves versus what we charge
Yep.
to the town and employees.
Good question, Lisa. So we developed this overall budget. We then take this budgetary number and we break it down into rates. So we look at where your employees are enrolled, what plan and what tier they're enrolled in. We then look at those rates to determine how does that factor into the projection. we develop those rates to make sure that they come up to what we're projecting in an aggregate level. Now, some municipalities, not all, some will use their health fund to adjust the overall budgetary rates for the town and the board. Some will even make an adjustment to the employees if you have a sizable health fund. So that is a decision that is made by the municipality, but something that we can work with you on.
Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that decision would be made and what factors go into that decision and who makes
Sure.
that decision? Thanks.
You bet. So there's a couple towns in particular that I work with that we look at their health fund balance every year. They actually have an ordinance in place that says if their health fund exceeds 25% of the overall expected cost, they then take that difference and they use 1/3 of it. They don't use the full amount. They use 1/3 of that balance to offset what the town and the board funds. So if by chance you had a balance of $1 million and 1/3 of that could be used, they use that $333,000 to offset what the board and the town would fund into the health fund in the coming year.
Could we get a copy of that ordinance?
I can see if I can dig it up.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's I will tell you it's called the matrix, the town matrix, and it's a very complicated piece, but we go through it every year with them, and we'll see if we can't get you a copy of that.
Is that a financial policy or a legislative? You know, that's okay. You can get it to us and we'll look at
Good
it.
question. I don't know the answer to that. I just know it's been in place. I believe this particular group on self-funded back in the 90s and has been in place since way back then.
Thanks. I'm interested in that because I know we're at 30% and our
Yep.
target is 25.
Yep. Okay. Any questions on this piece? Okay, so, the other thing that we do during the year is we want to make sure we keep tabs on how things are running. So Amy, if you don't mind jumping forward. So we track your health claims on a monthly basis because we want to make sure that, when you come to year end, when we come to the budgetary process, there are no surprises. So we want to make sure that, when we're sitting down with you in November and in January for those budget meetings, in fact, how things are running. So, fortunately, this year, because of the whole COVID impact, you can see down below what was paid out in fiscal year 20. So you can see that the net claim amount, if you see that bottom line number, was 12.711 million. That's what you paid out in claims in fiscal year 20 for medical insurance. If you were to go back and look at the budgetary amount was 14.6 million. So back to your point, Lisa, about having a healthy reserve fund, I think the COVID impact is going to have a very positive balance on municipalities' health funds at the end of the fiscal year 20. You can see.
How do you recommend using that? Keeping that in reserves to lower rates, to move it into OPEB? What is your recommendation there?
It really depends on where your reserve balance is at. If your reserve balance is at 30% right now, I don't know that I would recommend moving it into OPEB. I would tell you that we need to do evaluation of your health fund. Normally what I'm saying or what we're recommending is that your health fund should be at 125% of expected cost. So you're not that significantly above that. But that goes back to developing a process of when you are overfunded, how you utilize that fund. And again, what I would suggest is looking at that on an annual basis and using 1/3 of that balance to offset any funding requirements for the town and the board for the coming year. And again, 1/3 might not be the right number for Simsbury, but it's just I wouldn't use the full amount in any given year. Because think about it, if you had a overage in your fund balance of $1 million and you use that all in 1 year, you would be reducing the funding requirements in that fiscal year by 1 million. Next year, you're going to have a big issue when you go to fund.
Is there ever a point where you have too much in reserves? At one point, we had 6 million.
My opinion, yes. Yeah. But that's when you consider what that fund balance can be used for.
Okay.
Like you mentioned, it could be an OPEB transfer if you wanted to do that.
Perfect. All right. That was really helpful to sort of understand how that plays into budget making decisions. Thank you.
Yeah. Good questions. So positive on the medical side, as we look at even we only had 2 months. We have not received September claims as of yet, but July of 20, August of 20, our overall expectation on medical claims is roughly 1.2 million. So we're running definitely below expected initially in the fiscal year 21. Okay. On the same side, if you want to flip to the next report, Amy, we do the same thing on the dental side, much smaller dollars, but you can really see the impact of COVID. If you look down and you look at what was paid under April and May of 2020, as you're all aware, most dental offices in Connecticut were closed in the April-May timeframe. So you saw a huge drop-off in your dental claims during that time period. And I even started in March, dropped as well. So on the dental side of the house, for fiscal year 20, we had budgeted $958,000. We're at $728,000. So again, you'll have a surplus balance as a result of the dental claims as well. Any questions on the whole budgeting process, what we look at, what we consider as we go through our evaluation?
I just want to know if we get continuing education credits for this last hour plus.
Yes, I'll sign for you, Rob.
We do for the town of Simsbury.
Yeah. No, thank you very, very much.
Can I ask? I do have a general question, but I didn't want to interrupt if you had more to say.
Go ahead, Linda, please.
Okay. So I used to be the Medicaid director for the state of Connecticut before I worked in the insurance industry. And one of the things that we did that I don't know if you even can do it in the private sector, but which I thought was a very good idea. We would analyze people's claims. And if they had other employer-sponsored insurance that they hadn't bought in for because they couldn't afford the premium or whatever, we would buy in for them. And so I have a question about how many of the people on our plan are dependents who are otherwise employed and have access to their own health insurance through their own employer, but choose not to use it because our plan is almost undoubtedly a richer plan. And would it make sense for us to help them buy into their plan if they're a high-cost person so that they're held harmless in terms of expense and that they use our plan as a secondary payer? Is there value to looking at that as a long-term cost containment strategy? And it even, affects the stop loss, and it affects us more in the 275 that we would be paying. But do you ever look at that, and do you ever see any other private sector plans do buy-ins of other employer-sponsored insurance?
So, a couple different points on that, Linda. Very valid points. First of all, let me touch on Medicare first, because that's something that is always a consideration of employers. How you get your, over 65 employees and dependents off your plan and onto Medicare.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the federal government frowns on that. So that is not something that we would recommend. The federal government basically has legislation out there that says employers cannot select against the government regarding health insurance coverage. Regarding other employers' plans, what we have seen is we've seen employers where basically they state if you have other spousal, if you have spousal coverage elsewhere, that the spouse can no longer be on our plan, or the spouse has to pay a surcharge in order to be on your plan. Now, that's easy to say in the commercial side. Public sector, it's a little bit more difficult. You have union
Well, it would
contracts.
have to be negotiated.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly. And
but that's why I said you'd have to do it in a way that holds the employee harmless, or you'd never get it negotiated with the unions. And you could even create an incentive, but you'd have to zero in on those particular cases where it makes sense for us to do it.
What I have suggested in other municipalities, Linda, is that, most towns and board of eds have flat employee contribution rates. So employees pay 15% of the cost of coverage, no matter which tier they're in. What I've recommended in other municipalities is, instead of having a 15% flat contribution, say it's 15% for employee only, 30% for employee plus spouse, and 40% for family. Now, it's been recommended many times, have not seen it pass through negotiation at all. So yes, those types of programs can be considered. I just think that within a union environment, it's going to be very difficult to get past.
Maria, what do we have currently?
Are you referring to the employee shares of the premium, or?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure. So, and I'm generalizing because it does vary a little bit contract by contract and depending on a person's hire date. But generally speaking, it's 20% of the share of the premium for the HMO plan, and 15% of the share of the premium for the high deductible health plan, which I think, again, is, not unusual sort of in our municipal world. And then a number of our contracts also do have a payment in lieu of health insurance program. And that is to try and incentivize folks whose spouses do have the potential to access coverage through their employer to leave our plan entirely. Whether it's, let's say it's a, 2 children and the employee and the spouse, everybody would have to leave the plan in order to be eligible for that payment in lieu of health insurance. So we do have that in a number of our contracts.
And have you thought about doing what Tim was suggesting about tiering it based on the number of people in one's family?
Yeah, we've discussed that in the past. To Tim's point, I haven't seen that in a negotiated or an arbitrated settlement at this point. But it is something that we've discussed. Tim and Rebecca and the Lockton team do assist us with preparing proposals in regards to our collective bargaining proposals with employee benefits. And we do also now coordinate that with the Board of Education. So we're really looking across all the bargaining units for both the town and the board, and really trying to take sort of a nice, coordinated, systemic approach to benefit strategies. So that's been very helpful.
Yep.
So I don't want to take a lot of time, but I'd like to ask formally that Maria and our consultants just take a look at the legality and whether it makes sense. I mean, I don't know how many of our higher cost claimants are spouses or adult children with other employer-sponsored insurance available to them, and whether it would make sense for us to offer or require them to use that other employer-sponsored insurance in a way that does not that holds them financially harmless, so that it might be something the unions would be willing to do because it wouldn't adversely affect the employees. So if you could just take a look at whether that makes sense, and to do that, you'd need to look at your claims data about how often it
that's
what the financials are.
Yeah, I mean, because the purchase of health insurance and the usage of health insurance is going to vary significantly from one employee to the other. Trying to come up with a uniform across all members, I don't think you can do it. I think what you would be almost doing would be having employees bring into the town their explanation of benefits and to try to get reimbursement. I'll have to think more about that and discuss it with Rebecca, but I'm not sure that Good.
Why don't you give me a call offline, and we can talk about it, at some future date. I mean, I'm not pushing to have it done immediately, but I have no idea if the 3 or 4 people who are the high cost folks over 275,000, are they dependents? Are they employees? If they're dependents, do they have other insurance? For somebody like that, it might make a lot of sense to get them onto their own employer's insurance. And that's what I want to look at. I'm away right now, but in December, let's plan, you and I, to have a conversation about it with whatever staff wants to participate.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you guys very, very much. We appreciate it. Let's move on. And the timing, just quickly, the timing, this becomes part of the budget. You'll have a forecast for us. We already have one. We'll have another one, and they get updated as we move through the budget process, right?
Correct.
Okay, great.
Just one follow-up question. Are you, in your forecasting, are you anticipating using the 1/3 above 25% in your rates calculation?
And not initially. Initially, what we will do is we'll provide an aggregate budget, and then we'll have a discussion with the town.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks again very much, Rebecca and Tim. Really appreciate it. All right, moving.
Thank you,
moving
guys.
on. Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
guys.
You're welcome to stay. Oh, you're gone already. All right. Next order of business, approval of the minutes. I had made a suggestion for an edit that Karen had sent around just to include the message that we shared with the town, with the Board of Selectmen and Ms. Lawler regarding the Meadowwood property. So Karen put that in. Were there any other edits or comments? So I'd look for a motion to approve those minutes as amended.
I'll move
So
that.
moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Approved. All right, next up is the Finance Director's report. Where'd Amy go? Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah, I'm good. Okay, so first up is your updated listing of grants and donations as per usual. And then we have the COVID-19 update. So on the town side, the last time I presented this report, expenditures for fiscal year 21 were about 23,000, and now you can see that it's about 55,000. So there was about a $10,000 increase in 3 areas. The first being the resident assistance, the second being additional staff overtime, and then the third being election supplies. So the residents assistance, this is just continuing the food program for those affected by the pandemic and providing gift cards to those residents. And then the additional staff and overtime relates to the election workers. So as we previously discussed, the state of Connecticut changed the way that they were going to conduct the voting for this year, which put a great strain on our town clerk's office. So we needed additional supplies and staff resources for that. So those are the increases related to the additional staff and the overtime. So the prior year loss, as you may recall from our last meeting, we had significant savings in our line items from last year. So that wasn't an issue. The current year loss at this point is being covered. So the state of Connecticut has allotted us $55,800 for COVID relief. So we're in the midst of applying for that application now. And then we are also granted $13,738 for election funding, and then received another election grant in the amount of about $8,600. So the total available money right now that we know we have coming for this year is $78,220, which, as you can see, covers our anticipated loss as of right now. The other thing that I did not include is we did apply for FEMA funding for some of our expenditures. FEMA funding has been extremely difficult. We applied months ago. They keep changing their guidance. They have not given us a final settlement. They haven't even given us final guidance on what they're going to cover and what they're not going to cover. One thing that they said that they were going to cover the last time I spoke with them is the gift cards. So that's pretty amazing for the food purchases. That's one thing I actually did not expect them to cover. But other things that they said that they were going to cover, they've kind of reneged on, and like masks, gloves, things of that nature that you think would be kind of standard. They're approving for fire and police personnel, but they won't approve it for other municipal personnel because they're not emergency related. So more to come on that, kind of work through the FEMA process and find out where they stand and get some final guidance on that. On the Board of Education side, the fiscal year 21 to date, we have about $800,000 in expenditures. The last time I reported out, the expenditures were actually $825,000, so a decrease of about $20,000. Last time, if you recall, our personnel line item was at about $275,000, and now it's at $120,000. The Human Resources Department at the Board of Ed was able to fill some vacant positions at lower rates than the people that they were replaced, which gave us a lot of savings. And then those savings were able to offset the new positions that were created during the year for the 5 additional teachers for distance learning. And then they also hired 3 additional custodians to keep up on the cleaning. And then between the state funding and the non-lapsing that they have available, they are able to cover their COVID expenditures as of right now and still have about $280,000 left in their non-lapsing.
Amy, just I had discussed this with both you and Rob. We had talked about at some point we are going to need to do an appropriation because you can't do an expenditure without an appropriation. And the model we used in 2011, I think, is a pretty good one. I'd send you minutes on that. So we can look to do that in November. I think Rob wanted to do that, but I wanted to let the board members know to anticipate that and whether we should be doing a special revenue fund as we did after the 2011 storm to account for the state and federal grants that are coming in related to the current emergency. So if we could get some guidance on that for next month, that would be great.
Yep. So to that point, when we do the quarterly, so right now we're obviously not currently over budget, but we are going to put it on the agenda for November when we go through the quarterly so that we have ourselves covered.
At that time, will we have the Board of Ed's October count for students and all of that? That's normal. So.
Yep. So that's going to their board next week. So it'll be available for our board meeting in November.
Okay. I know we talked about the number of students that were lower than what were expected, and a good portion of them were in kindergarten. I just remember last year when we had more kindergartners show up, there were 3 new teachers. So I'm anxiously awaiting that report.
Okay, fair enough.
All right.
So moving on to the record keeping, there was a request. Disappointed Kevin didn't make it. This was actually his request, where employees could be automatically enrolled into the voluntary 457 plan. Attached is a letter from the town human resources coordinator on this matter. He consulted with our labor attorney on this. And basically all employees will be set up with an ICMA account when we transition over. We can't mandate their contributions, but if any of them do not want to contribute to the plan, they will have to complete an opt-out form. That's basically a summary of what the letter says based on our attorney's recommendation.
I think that's a great move. It's good for the employees.
Yep.
Agreed. On to the potential Meadowood update, the acquisition update. So staff is still continuing to put together research and data. When Meadowood presented, the Board of Finance wanted this to be included within the fiscal year 22 budget so that they could see everything as a whole. So in the meantime, we are continuing to do research and put data together for the presentation during the budget season. There is some preliminary data that is in draft form that's included in your packet that they've been working on. I don't know if you have any questions or any interest of that.
The only question I have is do we need any motions to appropriate money for an independent appraisal? I know our board expressed an interest in having an appraisal of the land, and also what it would be absent the zoning approvals. Is there any plan to bring that before us for an additional appropriation?
So, we did consult with Bob somewhat on this, and typically in the past we haven't done. The town hasn't commissioned separate independent appraisals. Again, TPL is a nonprofit agency. They are working on our behalf. They hired an incredibly reputable appraiser who's very well respected within the field. What Bob suggested as a possible solution, we could always maybe hire an appraiser to do a peer review of the methodology that was used as opposed to starting from scratch. It would be much less costly, but if perhaps that might, give the board a greater comfort level, again, to have another well-respected appraiser and do a peer review of the methodology, that would be a much, lower cost way to perhaps get to the same place if you felt like.
So I'll just speak to sort of abatements in general. I think it has nothing to do with the great service that we get from our firefighters and everybody else, but I do think that we need to be transparent about the taxes that would have been paid and the fact that this in effect is an offset against that. I think there's also an issue as to whether that should impact the fire district tax or the town tax. And so that in general, we should maybe show the tax that would otherwise be due gross and then the abatements as a line item. Because as these accumulate over time, it gets to be a significant amount of money. 33,000 doesn't sound so bad, but it goes on forever and it grows. So that just be something I think we should be talking about as we go into the budget process.
I concur I just want to support Rob on that. And I know we've talked about it in the past about budgeting for abatements. I think the two abatements, the economic development abatements, are going to hit in fiscal year 22. Amy had said last budget cycle. So we're going to see those abatements hit. And, abatements are really where government agrees to forego revenues for public good. So abatements can be good or bad or whatever. But one of the criticisms of them, to Rob's point, is they often aren't transparent and you can't see the accumulation of them. And one of the things I would also look to is, Amy, if we could get a summary for even November, what are the current abatements out there, and also include those that are approved by other governments like the state. There are state mandated abatements that we are forgoing revenue from. I'm thinking the personal property tax on manufacturing. Okay. So those accumulate, and those are a large number, and it's important for the public to understand that this is revenue that is being foregone because our elected representatives, either at the state or local level, has deemed them a public good. And it's just good to lay it out there and be transparent about it. So if we could get that summary, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Finance Director's report is concluded. Proposed general fund balance transfer.
Yeah. So this is something that we discussed at the last meeting as part of year-end transfers. Before making any transfers, the Board of Finance wanted some guidance from the town attorney to make sure that if we do put any funds in the capital reserve, that it can be used at their discretion during the budgeting process. So I did speak with the town attorney on this, and the regular budget process would follow. The Board of Selectmen would recommend the projects, and then the Board of Finance would decide how to pay for them, whether it be a tax revenue, general fund reserves, or capital reserves. The Board of Finance also requested some scenarios based on the fund balance policy that you all adopted at the meeting, anywhere from that 15% range to that 17% range. So attached in the packet is those different scenarios presented for you for your review and discussion.
So Amy, just to clarify Bob's position. So if we were to make a transfer mid-year, it would require two board approval, but during the budget appropriation, it's not actually a transfer, it's an appropriation. So that remains within the budget making authority of the Board of Finance. So it would not require the Board of Selectmen during that process. Okay, thank you.
You're on mute, Rob.
The total that's available to be transferred is 2.8 million.
So if you want to be at 15% of
No,
that,
that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking there's 2.8 that could be transferred.
within your fund balance policy, yes.
Okay. How much, if we didn't have a fund balance policy, could we transfer?
You can transfer the whole thing of 17 million.
Okay.
Forget it.
That wasn't really what I was asking. How much is the increase this year?
I believe it was about $3 million.
Okay. That was the number I was looking for.
Gotcha.
I think we ought to go with $1 of reserves and see how it works out. So we want to make a motion and pass this tonight. This has been on the agenda for 2 previous meetings. And I guess I would, somebody else needs to make the motion, but I'm sort of moved by the $2.3 million number that's between 15 and 16. Between 15 and 17 at 15.8%.
So I'm a little higher than you, I'm sure you can expect.
That's shocking. And I'll bet Linda's lower. Linda's the lowest number.
Yeah,
Kevin and Derek aren't here, so
I need Kevin
Where's
and Derek
Highburger?
here. Where are they?
yeah, they're not here tonight.
I mean, one thing I will say, one of the risks that has been identified is that the state will rate it. I don't see that as a real risk right now. And I do see the pandemic. We're seeing surges right now. I think we're at 3% just today at the state of Connecticut. So I'd rather have it in the keep it in the general reserves at this point. So I'm more comfortable with either the 6.3% or the 16.85%. So that 1,300 or what is the other one? Amy?
What would the number, how much would it be? This is terrible. This is pretty linear, isn't it? So if we did 2 million even, I bet we'd be right on 16.
Amy?
That sounds right, but I need to look at my handy dandy worksheet to make sure that's accurate.
That's probably right, because 1.8 million gets us to 1635.
Mm-hmm.
So could we just make a motion to say transfer whatever amount is going to result
Necessary to
in
get to
16%?
16%? Make that motion, Linda. Make that motion.
I'll make the motion.
I make that motion.
Okay.
Good, yep. Rob, you were asking, I tend to be more on the cautious, we need the reserve side of this if you were looking.
Oh, well, all right.
Yeah, I'm more comfortable with the 1.8 or the 1.3.
Linda,
One
did you make a motion at the whatever number it is to get to 16?
Yeah.
All
I'm
right.
not comfortable with that motion without knowing what that number is.
Oh, for God's sakes. Hang on. Give me a minute.
And Amy, while Rob is configuring that, this is anticipated end of year reserves, not current reserves, correct?
Right, it's at the end of fiscal year 20.
You don't have that
No.
open, do you, Amy? Can you just run
No. My question is, what are projected reserves fiscal year 21? What are we I'm thinking about how are we gonna end fiscal year 21?
No idea.
But where are we on target as of today?
As of today, we're within budget. Even with the COVID expenditures, because we have the anticipated revenue.
So as of today, we're looking at reserves as they are projected for the close of fiscal year 20. Is that correct?
Right,
So no change.
right.
I thought this would be easier.
Rob, I think we can make it easy. I mean, it's either.
Yeah, it's
we
2
can
million,
make-
2 million 50 would get us right about between 16 and 16.1%. 2,050,000. That's halfway between those two numbers.
And what is your thinking as to why you want to do that, Rob?
Because I like 16. I don't, no, I think it's a balance between the two thoughts that are represented on this board.
Yeah, he's trying to get a compromise between me and you, Lisa.
Lisa, on a good night, Lisa would have had the vote. I mean, would have had the votes against you and me, Linda. I'm with you on this, actually.
Okay. So one of the things I just want to clarify before we do that, because I would just do a clean 2 million and it's close enough. But the only thing I do want to clarify is by putting it in the reserves, I want to make it clear that we are not planning on using it for capital purchases. We're looking at increased pension costs, increased mortality costs. And so this may end up being used for a mill rate stabilization fund, or if COVID costs go through the roof, or if there are health increases because of COVID expenditures. So it should not be looked at as
right. All of those things are on the table always when we get
and this
to the
is not a signal that we're planning on using it for capital in any means.
Well,
Right.
But wait a minute, aren't you putting it in the capital reserve fund?
Yes. That's why I'm hesitant
you're
to
saying-
move that much. Yeah.
we are parking the money in the capital reserve fund, which we have full discretion over.
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
All right, so I still need a second to Linda's motion, though.
I'll make the second.
What is the number, Linda? Is
2.
No, we're going to use a clear 2 million, and it's going to be just over 16%.
Okay.
That's a compromise.
Linda,
got a
is that
little-
your number?
Yep.
Okay.
And Art is still seconding that number?
Yep. I'm good. Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
I'm going to oppose it, but I'm comfortable with I can live with it.
All right, so Karen, that passed 3-1. All right, that's fine. Good deal. All right, proposed police private duty fund transfer.
I can't believe we're back at this again.
This is another one that we talked
I
about.
only had one goal for tonight's meeting, and was that this would be the last meeting this would be on the agenda.
Yes, please.
The private duty fund balance had about $151,000 left in it at the end of fiscal year 20. So again, the Board of Finance wanted some feedback from the town attorney on, does this money automatically revert back to the general fund in accordance with how the previous Board of Finance set it up, or does it have to go through the formal transfer process? So I spoke with Bob, and in order to be in compliance with the general statutes, it does have to go through the formal transfer process. So the Board of Finance does make the recommendation to whatever fund they want to put it in, and then the Board of Selectmen will review that recommendation.
Amy, question. So the way the fund is set up then is not permissible. Is that what Bob is saying? You can never have a fund where funds automatically revert?
Right.
So
Not
I think
in compliance with state statute.
so. We
So
could
we-
eliminate the fund entirely then, correct?
Yeah, I can't see how ethically that's correct.
That doesn't make any sense.
It's been done in contravention to what was written policy and previously adopted by the town, and that people ignored for whatever reason. And you're saying now you can't undo it? I mean, that if you get away with sneaking the money in and not transferring as it was supposed to be, then you get to keep it? I mean, that's bizarre to me.
It's the responsibility of the boards to keep an eye on the balance and the management so that doesn't happen. But I mean, I'm just the messenger. That's what Bob said. If you want to be in compliance with state statutes, then you have to do the formal transfers.
So I would like, can we get Bob back in for a conversation on this? Because it doesn't make sense that then I will never support creating a special revenue fund if we can never get rid of it. That's kind of crazy.
Well, I know under charter, the Board of Finance does have the authority to abolish, but using, I don't know how that would work to abolish the fund.
Yeah, because if you abolish a fund, the funds have to go somewhere, right? And it doesn't require a transfer. Once they're abolished, they go back, they revert to the general fund. It seems to me.
Maybe the abolishment would only be on a special revenue fund that's been spent in totality. And then if a transfer is requested, maybe that would have to go through the transfer process. It's the only thing I can think of.
So I would like a second.
so we
get Bob in and to discuss
yes,
this.
I agree. Because sorry to ruin your goal there, Rob.
That's all right.
But this doesn't make any sense to me. And if our only option is to abolish the fund, then I would vote to abolish it and then recreate another fund to do just what we originally have said multiple times, which is that the police need money to, deal with the private duty stuff. But other than that, working capital, any profits revert to the general fund.
I think what Bob said is that isn't purposeful to set up a fund in that way, which doesn't make sense.
So it begs the question whether we have any other funds that are set up this way, special revenue funds that we thought would have excess. And you did all of that work, Amy, earlier this summer. Mm-hmm. And this was the one that jumped off the page at everybody. But
Yeah,
let's just defer this until we can get the answer that makes sense. All right. And then we can have it on the agenda in November.
Okay.
Oh, goody.
All right. So we defer this.
Wait.
All right. Next is the food services discussion.
I'm just going to share my screen. So this is also in your packet too. It just makes it kind of easier for me to explain. So this is the food services fund from fiscal year 16 all the way to the end of fiscal year 20. So obviously you see that you have all of your revenues, your expenditures, and then your net change in fund balance, and then your fund balance. So down here, down here, you can see that the net change in fund balance over like the last several years has been pretty consistent. So we lost some, we earned some, we lost some, we earned some, and then I'll talk about this in a minute. And as you can see, our fund balance has been pretty consistent year over year. There wasn't anything for cause for alarm or anything that needed to be addressed related to this fund. However, during COVID for fiscal year 20, this fund did see a significant loss, and actually their loss is greater than this 80,000. So the the Board of Education did have to help out this fund with $100,000 in funding to make this fund end in a positive position. So had they not done this, if I take this out, then the unrestricted fund balance would have been a negative, and the fund would have was literally zero cash. So the fund balance is broken out into two pieces. So here you have your fund balance for inventory. So this is not physical cash. This is just food that we have on hand. And then this is your physical cash. So as you can see here, our cash would have been in a deficit. So because we had such a large loss in fiscal year 20, without the help of a transfer from the Board of Education, this fund is no longer solvent. It can't pay its own bills. So this is something that we need to keep an eye on for this coming fiscal year as we work through the COVID situation. So out of that $150,000 loss, $150,000 of that loss was related to COVID. And then the other $30,000 was related to the minimum wage impact. So as of right now, we don't really know where this fund is going to take us at the end of the current fiscal year. So we know we need to keep an eye on it. COVID is still going on. There are not as many meals that are being administered by the program. People are choosing to have their kids either bring their lunch or, they have distance learning days. So that's impacted the fund. The only benefit to this year compared to last year is last year when we closed down schools, it was mandated that we had to keep serving lunches even without payment. Whereas this year, that's not the case. So if this is just a temporary position where when we start to see a decrease in COVID and things start to get back to normal, if the fund builds itself back up, then there's a non-issue. However, if it's not COVID related and this becomes the new norm, then we are going to have to explore some other options related to the program and the fund itself. So this is something that we're going to talk through during the budget season as we get a better handle. Right now, we're only through, 1 month of school, and I have a little bit of data. So like this time last year, we had served 249 meals for breakfast. This year, we've only done 67. Same thing for the same week for the lunch program. So last year it was 2,247 meals. And then the same week this year, it's like 548 meals. So, is it due to having the hybrid learning, or is this going to be the new norm? And we just don't have the answer to that yet. So just something to bring to your attention that is going on, something that we are keeping an eye on, and something that we will keep you up to date on. So just a heads up for now.
Amy, I have a couple questions. When there have been years in the past where, because I this is actually a fund I have followed with a little bit of detail over the years, and as you said previously, it did bounce up and down and up and down and up and down. So there were years where there were losses in the past, and then amazingly, the very next year there'd be a surplus. How was it funded? I believe it was just funded, within the Board of Ed's budget, they made up the difference, the losses.
No, so the fund always had a fund balance. It always had reserves to take care of those losses in those years. And so the years that we had a surplus, that would just go into fund balance. And then the years that we had a deficit, the fund balance would take care of it. But unfortunately, because since there was such a large loss in fiscal year 20, we have no more fund balance.
Okay, I see. And my other question, and it's probably way too long an answer for you to deal with right now, but I am totally mystified. I mean, I understand that there's less revenue going in because there are fewer people paying for meals, but one would expect that there would be less expense, and that might have been pretty predictable, that with school, not being in full time, et cetera, that could be predictable. And so I'm kind of astonished that there was a loss last year when school was. I still don't understand that. I know you tried to explain it to us once before.
Yeah,
and that we didn't learn enough to predict that would be the case this year as well. I don't know. It has to do something with how food's bought.
This year we don't know. So we can, to a certain extent, we can control our purchasing this year, but we also controlled our purchasing last year in fiscal year 20. So if you look at just the food purchases, we were $120,000 less last year than we were in fiscal year 19. So they were able to control some of the food purchases, but unfortunately to receive some federal funding, we do have to make a certain amount of purchases, and that goes into our inventory. So as you can see, if you look at the fund balance reserve for inventory, we were $15,000 higher than we were the prior year, which is a lot of food.
Which makes no sense. I mean, the federal rules on this, if that's what's driving it, I hope somebody's advocating to change that, because there's it's ridiculous to force the towns to be buying food that you can't use because you don't have enough kids eating.
Right. And in this particular case, that is the situation. It's because of the federal mandates and the reimbursement that's allotted that, we are in that position. So either we don't accommodate and then we get no federal funding, or we accommodate and we at least get some of it. So, that's definitely a flaw in the program.
So one last request is something I have asked in the past, which predates you being in here. And that is, could we look at contracting out? There are many companies that will, privatize not only food services, but also facility management and the like. But at least I've asked in the past, could we please look at contracting out food services? I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be a better deal, but at least let's look at it. Because perhaps, and I'm guessing here, but perhaps if you're using a contractor who's buying for multiple school systems and not just the one, perhaps they have ways of dealing with this that we don't have.
Yeah, absolutely. We can definitely take a look at that during budget season.
Thank you.
All right, one last question. The line item for 2020 actual that is advanced meal pay, $403,000. Are we at risk of having to give that money back to people who paid for meals and then didn't take them, or do they get carryover credit?
They do. They get carryover credit, but if they did want to take their money back, they absolutely could. So there is a potential liability there.
So the deficit could be worse than we thought.
Absolutely.
Because we bought the food and we couldn't give it back, but we might have to give back the money for the food that wasn't eaten. All right. Okay. Keep us posted.
Amy, could you summarize the deficit and what it would be if the 400 hits?
So if everybody wanted their money back, you can just add pretty much $400,000 to the deficit. So
we'd have to go into the general fund, $350,000, because the unrestricted fund balance is only $60,000.
So what is the total deficit? I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the chart. I just don't see it. If you could just point me to that.
The unrestricted fund balance in the gray at the bottom, $59,500. And
that could go up by another 400.
That includes the $400,000 that we collected from people for meal plans, a portion of which might need to be refunded because, again, they were in school until March. So some portion of that 100,000 might need to be refunded.
Okay. So it's still under 300,000. So
yeah, it would exactly. It would be an amount that were you thinking about the non-lapsing account or?
Yeah. Yep. Yes, I am. Thank you.
All right. Agreed. All right. Next, town savings initiatives.
So this is something that the Board of Finance had requested. These are town savings initiatives that different departments kind of put together their items on this one spreadsheet for you all to review. So I can't really speak to all of them, but if you have any questions or follow-up items, I can definitely bring it back and give you the responses from the department heads. We also talked about at our planning meeting, the Board of Ed. Those will be on your next agenda.
Okay. So again, the board members should review these. If you have questions, submit them to Amy and me or Lisa, and we will decide whether we need to talk about it at the next meeting. All right?
Yes, and maybe for the next meeting, Amy, if you could ask them to incorporate Linda's suggestion of doing an RFQ or RFP on food service as a potential savings initiative.
Okay, good. The last item is the budget policy discussion. Again, this largely is attributable to work that Lisa initiated and I helped her with. I think this is an effort on our part to quantify the important aspects that we want to present at the tri-board meeting about the structure around which we will make a budget. I think I would ask, this is being presented today like our normal practice of having introduction at this meeting, read it, think about it, we'll talk about it, and then try to have a meaningful discussion about it at the November meeting. I think a couple of issues that I would mention, Amy and I spoke earlier today. It's not clear we want to make this an actual policy as opposed to a guideline, because to the extent that we end up with a budget that doesn't meet exactly some of these criteria, we could find ourselves the place we want. So we might need some guidance on that, on the structure of that. But the idea is to, when we sit down with the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen and as a Board of Finance at the tri-board meeting, that there's a framework on which we can talk about the budget as we build it. And I think I said this last year. I would want to emphasize that ultimately the goal here is for the boards to come up with expense budgets that help us get to our target. and that the mill rate is a product or result of balancing the expenses, the forecasted revenues through taxes, and the decision of where we need the fund balance to be based on a target basis. So rather than have each board sort of figure out where they could give and take and what, to get to a 2% mill rate increase, I'd much rather you look at budgets very holistically, expense budgets in particular, to get to the most efficient way to spend money. We've got lots of areas where the Board of Finance has to make decisions like we did last year. The assumed return rate on the pension fund, the mortality rates, the debt service components, all of these things, some of those things are very big numbers. All right. But as members of the Board of Finance, I'd ask that we go through the policy and be prepared next meeting to fill out the blanks and be ready to have something that a work product that we can give to the other two boards at the, before the tri-board meeting, so that we can go into that meeting all on the same page about what we need to talk to, and we can listen carefully to the areas of concern or difficulty that we know we'll hear from both the Board of Ed and the town.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that, thanks, Rob, that was an excellent summary. One of the things Rob and I really tried to put together was benchmarking. And the reason why we're doing that, it's not just about you look at what do AAA towns spend? What can our residents afford? And that's internal, but you also have to benchmark with other towns, because if we are spending way above what other towns are, and it costs a lot more in taxes for the same priced house, eventually that becomes a competitive disadvantage to not only homeowners, but businesses that can negatively spiral the economic condition of the town. So it's a combination of that. And some of the information here we won't have entirely for the November meeting, but we do hope and anticipate that town staff can get that to us for certainly by the budget cycle that comes through. So, and if there's anything we missed, let us know. I'd also encourage members of the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Education, if they think there's a factor we should be considering that we don't have in the draft, to let us know that as well, because we do view this as a collaborative budget making process and are open to that as well. So thanks, everyone.
Appreciate it. All right, good meeting. We learned a lot about stop loss and insurance, which was good. Linda, safe travels. Need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Seconded.
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor, say aye. We'll see you guys
Aye.
in a month or so. All right, thanks.
Okay, good night.
Thanks. Bye.